In this short lecture video, I want to talk a little bit about a few aspects of the scientific method. At the end of the chapter, the authors make a point of talking about the nature of science as self-correcting. This is an important point and one that students often forget when talking about research. For example, I often read in student papers that the findings of the study prove the hypothesis. No, never. The findings never prove the hypothesis. Rather, the findings support or do not support the hypothesis. Why is this important? Because of the fact that science is self-correcting. An unusual, surprising, or even intuitive finding from one study must be repeated. It is then through replication of that study that we find the need for corrections or the strength of research findings. But what does this mean then when we read differing findings on the same basic construct? Let's explore this a little bit using the first experiments in social psychology that were talked about in Chapter 1. In the late 1800s, we find that both Norman Triplett and Max Ringelmann were interested in the effect of others' participation on the performance of an individual. Triplett's findings were that the presence of another person enhanced the performance, while Ringelmann reported that adding other people to a task diminished the overall performance of an individual. Do these sound contradicting? In fact, they're not. Let's look at these experiments a little bit closer. Both Triplett and Ringelmann were adding research findings to formulate a theory about the impact of other people on an individual's performance. But neither of these is a replication, since a replication must repeat the study as it was originally conducted. This is why it's so important that constructs and variables are operationally defined so that the next researcher can use the same operationally defined variables. In both of these studies, the independent variable was the number of people participating in the task, and the dependent variable was the individual's performance on the task. However, a major difference is that in Triplett's study, the other person is competing against the measured performance of the individual. Triplett had an individual winding a fish reel, and when another person was added, then the actual time to complete the task decreased, thereby enhancing the performance of the individual, a principle known as social facilitation. For example, when you're swimming laps, do you swim faster if you're swimming laps alone or when someone else is swimming in the next lane? Triplett's findings suggested that when you have the competition of the other swimmer, your individual performance will be enhanced and your time will be less. Ringelmann, on the other hand, was more interested in cooperative performance. So in his study, he found that individual performance decreased as more participants were added. This is the premise of social loafing, in that you can hide your individual effort or lack of effort when there are others contributing. So you can see that while the basic constructs of the research are very similar, they are operationally defined differently to answer the particular research question. In fact, you'll find that even if you often use a similar experiment, for example, in Triplett's research, use swimmers instead of children reeling in a fishing line, you're still not replicating the original study. However, assuming your findings are consistent with Triplett's, you can now generalize to other contexts, increasing the external validity.